So, picture your workplace right now. Seriously, think about it for a second. Whether you're managing a massive processing plant or running a local food service operation, I've got a question for you. Is your team merely checking regulatory boxes, or have they cultivated a true, deep-seated awareness of the hazards around them? It's incredibly common to walk into facilities that look absolutely perfect on paper, but when you talk to the frontline workers, they have literally no idea why they're following certain protocols. They're just going through the motions.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're unpacking a really crucial dynamic today: how to build a true food safety culture. We're going to look at how an organization can elevate itself from just this baseline state of mere compliance to a dynamic culture where every single employee acts like an active shield against food safety failures. If you're into understanding how workplace systems actually function and thrive, you are definitely in the right place.
We've broken this explainer down into 5 main areas today. First up, culture beyond compliance. Then we'll hit the why of food safety, tailoring hazard training, engaging the frontline, and we'll wrap up with verifying the culture.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Culture Beyond Compliance. Let's talk about what it actually means to push way past the bare minimum. What's super interesting here is how food safety culture is explicitly defined as something totally distinct from your broader corporate culture. A true food safety culture is built on this continuous recognition of actual and potential hazards at all levels, across all functions. The big takeaway? This kind of culture simply cannot evolve if your focus is just strictly on meeting minimum regulatory requirements. I mean, sure, regulatory rules drive bottom-line compliance, but they almost always completely lack the context employees need to understand how those hazards affect the business as a whole. Actually, scratch that, it's not just about the business. It's about establishing a uniform comprehension of risks. You've got to surpass that baseline.
Which brings us to Section 2, the why of food safety, and how understanding that why creates a massive sense of shared responsibility across your whole enterprise.
The core idea here is that absolutely everyone must understand why we do things. When people actually get the reasoning behind a procedure, it's a huge trust builder. It promotes this deep trust that leadership is making the right calls regarding policies, procedures, and where they're investing their financial and human capital. When you make basic scientific and technical info accessible to everyone, you're engaging the hearts and minds of your workforce. It stops being about, well, I'm following this rule because my boss said so, and it transforms into a shared, enterprise-wide mission to keep people safe.
And this quote right here just brilliantly captures the human element of all this. All employees are themselves consumers with families and should feel the sense of responsibility that comes from working within the food industry. It's incredibly powerful when you take a step back and really think about it. Because when a food safety protocol fails, the consequence isn't just a ding on some audit score, right? The consequences affect human lives. In fact, the CDC estimates that 48 million people get sick from foodborne illnesses every single year. 48 million? Grounding your culture in that kind of empathetic reality reminds every single worker, from the CEO to the brand new line operator, of the very real human stakes involved in what they do every day.
All right, Section 3, Tailoring hazard training. Basically, getting the right education to the right role. Notice how this approach builds from the ground up. Not everyone needs to be a microbiologist, right? But everyone absolutely needs a foundation. So all employees get a basic overview of hazards, just to recognize the inherent responsibilities of being in this industry. Stepping it up a notch, your operators and practitioners need the in-depth training on control measures, critical control points or CCPs, and prerequisite programs like sanitation and allergen control. And then finally, your technical staff. These are the folks leading the overall development of your programs, doing the complex hazard analysis and communicating risk likelihood and severity. By scaling the education to fit the actual daily reality of the role, you're making sure the training is highly relevant and, more importantly, immediately applicable. But look, putting a solid curriculum together is really only half the battle. To make this training actually effective, the source lays out a few strict requirements. First off, it has to be sensitive to different learning styles. It's got to match the functional need of the role. And this is absolutely crucial. Basic scientific concepts must be understandable by non-technical staff. You literally cannot bury your frontline workers in technical jargon and expect them to care. It just doesn't work. Plus, because hazards are never static, there are always new market incidents, new tech, new legislation, this training has to be regularly reviewed and updated to catch any newly identified risks.
Moving right into Section 4, engaging the front line. We need top-down support and bottom-up action.
Okay, so there's a fascinating contrast here that explains so much about human behavior on the manufacturing floor. Think about general workplace safety for a second. Stuff like wearing safety goggles or lockout/tagout procedures. Frontline employees usually grasp this immediately, right? Because they're constantly monitored on it and the consequences of messing up are direct and immediate to them. If they don't follow the rule, they get hurt right then and there. But food safety, it is a totally different beast. The consequences of failing to wash hands or improperly sanitizing a surface are delayed, and they impact an unseen consumer who's miles away, maybe even weeks later. Since the immediate physical danger to the worker is zero, management has to work twice as hard to ensure employees know exactly why these control measures are so critical and what actually happens when they fail.
Because of that delayed consequence, your engagement strategy has to rely heavily on creating an environment where prevention is valued way, way more than treatment. The source really stresses that management has to foster a deeply trusting environment. Employees need to feel completely safe and empowered to report near misses, to share positive experiences, and to speak up the second they see inappropriate behavior or a potential hazard. And beyond that, they've got to feel like they have the absolute backing of management to take remedial action, even if that means literally shutting down an entire production line to isolate a product. Look, if a worker is terrified they're going to get fired for halting production to address a hazard, your food safety culture is fundamentally broken. Finally, Section 5, verifying the culture. How do we prove this whole thing is actually working?
You can't just assume this hazard awareness exists. You've got to verify it. Otherwise, you're risking devastating system failures. The source highlights 3 vital tools to validate what you're doing. First up, audits. But we're not talking about a basic paper-pushing exercise here. A real, experienced auditor evaluates if a deep, applied understanding of hazards exists right there at the line level. They drive expectations down and highlight gaps you can actually fix. Second, near-miss reviews. It's not enough to just say, oh, we had a near miss. You have to investigate it, establish the root cause, and build a rock-solid preventative action plan. And third, behavioral observation. This is where the rubber meets the road. Are the desired behaviors routinely practiced on the floor, even when nobody is watching? If employees truly believe the behaviors are required for safety, they're going to practice them routinely, for sure.
So I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Think about your own operations tomorrow morning. If you were to walk right up to a line operator and ask them what the real-world consequence is if their specific control measure fails, will they know the answer? Will they actually understand the why? Or are they just going to recite a rule back to you? By moving beyond mere compliance, tailoring your education, and fostering a culture that actually rewards speaking up about near misses, you transform your workforce from passive rule followers into an active, highly engaged line of defense. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep structuring those systems, and I'll catch you next time.